G'day, welcome back. Today I'm returning to my series on corresponding squares, and we've moved on to a very famous author from around the turn of the last century, Johann Berger. Now, I'm stretching it a little bit to call this corresponding squares. You can see the position there, but there are elements of that. And when I came across his book, which was from the late 19th century, I was really fascinated because he's got a lot of endgame studies, a lot of pawn endgame studies, and he actually has a lot of references and uses a lot of work of, for instance, Horwitz and Kling and so on. So I definitely think he deserved a mention in my series. Also, back to using my desk microphone just to see if that works a bit better. We'll see how that goes. Okay, so let's switch across the capture screen and have a look at what we know about him. Just quickly go to Wikipedia for starters, and there is an older picture of him than the one I had. Johann Berger. He is from Austria, born in Graz, Austrian master endgame study. He actually played chess against some very strong players, Max Weiss, Inkwitz, Blackburn, Minowa, so on, and then down here Pillsbury and Janowski and whatever. He wasn't a particularly strong player. He never really competed for top positions, but he always sort of was competitive. And then what we're mainly getting interested in here is Berger was a major endgame composer, having over 100 studies. His book, Theory and Praxis der Endspiel, Theory and Practice of the Endgame, was published in 1891, revised in 1932, and supplemented in 1933. Now, we'll have a quick look at that because you can get that on Google Books. So it's one of these good things where you can actually go and have a look at the older books, which, you can have a look at the examples. And that's why I've picked or looked through it. I think I might pick a couple of other ones later on, which he is referencing other composers I haven't heard of yet. And the other thing he's famous for here is the Sonnenborn-Berger system, which we've covered this before. The actual Sonnenborn-Berger score, which we use nowadays, came up from Neustadt. And then the one that he has with Sonnenborn is actually the non-Neustadt Sonnenborn-Berger score. I mean, it's a technicality in terms of the way it's calculated. So obviously a very important guy in the early years of chess. And then I'll just quickly show how he fits in with the world of things. First of all, I've got this sort of flowchart style one. We start with Philidor and Eulen and so on, Horwitz and Kling, the 80s in Germany. And you can see Berger's here. I based this on the sort of the average when they were born, when they died. So he's about the same time as Reti, Sackmann, Lasker, Locock, Dina, Les Neustadt, Otten, and so on. And if you go back to the comments I had about his book, this was the first modern comprehensive book on practical endgames and was a standard work on endgames for decades. And what they reckon is Chiron's book. Chiron, he's a little bit later, came out later, and that kind of replaced him as the standard endgame book. And then, I don't know what we want to think of in terms of later on. We've got Fine, I guess, Avavac series, obviously very important, and then more recently, Wallace's book and so on, right? So obviously very, very important in the framework. And you can see he's a part of his German, Austrian, Central European strength to the chess community. And just to have a look at that, we can bring the map version of it. Is Berger here. Graz must be in southern Austria. And it's just from Italy there with the Centurini and Biaghetti. These guys are kind of somehow similar time spans, to be honest. Lasker up there mentioned, and Chiron over there. So once again, it's very much Central European. Although obviously we've got these Russian players who came up. I'm actually going to look at two positions. The first one is nothing to do with corresponding squares, but just one of the more famous examples of a interesting trick in the endgame. So let me bring this up. And he covers this quite well in his book. So let me show you the bit of that book. You get the general idea there. So you get this in Google Books scanned, and there's position, and you can see he covers the lines on that next page. So let's go through that and have a look at what the trick is. The only drawing move, White's got to draw here, because obviously that pawn on the Ava is very dangerous. And here's the drawing line is F4. Go through that and see what happens. So the line given is a king c7 to get inside the square. I mean, this whole idea of calculating the square by the diagonal and then the box is supposedly derived from Berger. And then White's only drawing move is take that, and now the pawn gets pushed, and then you see this very strange self-stalemating pattern. Okay, so that's the only way for White to draw. So let's see what happens if he doesn't play F4. We'll go to variance of F4 in a second. So let's say he plays G3, then Black gets in the square more safely. And then now he's inside and he's got that extra square across. The stalemate trick's gone because g3 was played. Black stops the white pawns and his own pawn will promote. So that's one way. And the other way, I think, is why don't I play h4 first? See what happens here. And we take, because now there wasn't a threat of the pawn getting through, and then now we move our king across and get inside the box. So that's why those two other opening moves don't work. And then now we look at f4. Why is it only king c7 or king c8? Because if we push our pawn, and we now press h4, different pawns threatening to go. And what will happen is this is supposed to be winning for white because promote his pawn. Yeah, and the other way of doing it, here, 5 also works, and this time it works like that, and you end up with transposed the same position. So it's actually quite comprehensive on all the little lines he showed, and it's, you go back to the original position, the only way of drawing here is stalemate trick. Okay, cool. So I just thought that's a simple warm-up, and you're unlikely to hit that in your own games, which is quite cool, right? So now we go to this Berger position. Now, you can see there are elements of corresponding squares in this, and we'll see why. There is obviously the pawn break threats on the king side by white and pawn h on the queen side. But the funny thing is that we'll go through it now is that the pawn position, just to ignore the queen side for a minute, which we're going to do. I'm going to use my simulator. We're going to ignore the queen side for a moment. We're going to see that pawn formation is not very good for white. And in most instances, there's a corresponding square or just opposition setup that black can defend. I mean, ultimately it gets back to the fact that if you swap off the e-pawn on that square, and as long as black is in a sensible location, then he can still hold. And then you swap off this pawn on that square, and then as long as black's in a sensible position, you can still hold, because what you end up with is pawns on those three squares. It's a position I think we've seen before. It's kind of the backwards pawn and it's a rook pawn, all those sorts of things. So and hold, and that's what we're going through now. Okay, so I've set up 3 positions here on the simulator. Let's have a look at each of those in turn. This is the, as I said, when you've swapped off all the other pawns, you end up with this position. We want a result to be draw and say white to move. Right, so you'll see that if white king is on f5, corresponding square is f7, same thing. Obviously can't be on that square. And then if you walk around the side, if you were able to walk around the side. Oh, so there's none of that. So if you get the 6th rank, you're winning. So basically, black is blocking on the 7th rank or the 6th rank, and white can't get in. And white was probably just pushed a pawn and ended up there. So taking back. So that should be a drawn position as long as black's in those positions. You can see. Most logically, this is the sort of thing. E7, E5, F7, F. We'll have a look. I'll do corresponding squares on that later. Okay, that's one position. So let's go back one more. So now you've got this position with the extra pawn. White probably would be on E5. You may push the pawn and your F6 pawn took it. So let's go. Result is a draw. White to move. Okay, it's the same thing. Basically, white gets blocked. You're on the 5th rank, you have corresponding squares on the 7th rank, and then if you come around the side, you can see you also block around the side. Actually, everything doesn't work very well going further along, but you get the sense of you've got blockages that way. And then, of course, we can do one more version of this. We're talking about pawns on the king side. Right, so if you get this 4 versus 3 position, result should be a draw. Down, and white to move. Right now, white's got to be pushing his pawn to e5, so he'll have to be supporting it probably from d4. And basically, as long as you're on e6 or e6, there's a lot more flexibility here. Many squares give black the draw, but you've got to block him there. So if he tries to sneak around the side, you block him like that. Okay, cool. So that was using the simulator. Just say, well, this is going to be important later on to know that you can always drop back and defend that pawn formation, even though white has a pawn ahead. It's just the sort of the way they're all backwards. Okay, cool. So now let's have a look at that in terms of corresponding squares, which are what I've mapped out as 3 different things. So you go to the 4 versus 3 formation. You can see that I've mapped this thing. Square 1 doesn't really apply, but you can see there's corresponding squares 2 and 2 and 3 and 3, and then the 4 and 4 and the 5 and 5 and the 6 and 6 crossways. So that's how you keep white out. And 3 versus 2, corresponding squares somewhere. You can see that 3 versus 2, 1, 1, 2, 2, 3, 3, 4, 4, 5, 5, and 6, 6, the same sort of sideways pattern. And then we've got one more to look at, 2 versus 1, and you can see it is the same pattern. The main squares here are these ones on the 5th rank, covered by the corresponding squares on the 6th rank, and then the sideways are blocking. Also works in this case because and white's pretty lose if he does something silly like that. That's just sort of going through those steps of saying, I thought it was quite clever that you can imagine that presumably this position's actually been built up through time. You look at the position, add a pawn, add a pawn. I've seen some with more pawns actually, right? And then we said, okay, that's a kingside formation. Now let's go and look at the queenside formation, which we go back to the starting position, something else, which is this one here. What I found interesting about this position is that it's given as a loss for black. Berger is actually very comprehensive. If you look at this, he covers all king moves. He misses b5 in the version I have, which I think that the Google book is the earlier one from 1890. So we'll have a look at his lines, which he does all of them. King d6, king c6, and king d4, and we'll see what happens. This is actually a very clever position for black losing. There doesn't seem to be an issue with the other move I've marked there, b5. So let's have a look at the lines which were given by Berger. First of all, he does the king to d4 move, and the line you get here, black is now lost. The way white wins is to pick up the b pawn. Obviously, black's got a counterattack, but you can see he's too far behind. Exaggerating it a little bit. One more move probably would have been okay. And white can win a couple of ways, but the line he gives, which I think is clearly clever, stop the promotion, push the king up. Now we push our e-pawn, close the door then. That's quite clever. So now if black promotes now, queens will swap off and white will get another queen. We can't do that. And white, because if black takes, then he takes back the check, and then you've got the standard queen against the knight pawn, and different ways of doing it. I'm now not doing the Berger line, but let's say we push our pawn, and here is the line that the computer gave me. And it just push our pawn now, push our queen, push our pawn, say 5. I think you can see that this is actually a bit more complicated than maybe one imagined, but obviously now white's going to pick up the H pawn and promote. So that's pretty cool. That's just one of the lines. So that's the first line. So if we go back all the way back to here, that was if black went for the counterattack. I always think about a counterattack. So let's say there are 2 defensive tries here. So he also did both of those. King c6, that looks like an okay defensive move. Let's see what happens. King c4, king b4, he gave b4. Okay, we're taking the opposition. Now, just follow his line, which is king b5 actually also wins, but I'm following Berger's line. And I'm not too sure if he stops there or not. f4, what's he going to take? e5, take, and then now you have the breakthrough on the king side. And the key there is that the white king has moved back inside all the different squares, which the black pawns have. And then the final possibility is king to d6, and then okay, this is where he had that line. Basically, it's the same. So just sit in there, and white is going to win. Right, so that was pretty good. Berger covered all those lines, and it's a win for white because of the counterattack by black doesn't work, and if he doesn't do that, then eventually white will have a breakthrough and his GH pawn will grow. However, this is where could have played b5, which wasn't considered. Now, I suspect it wasn't considered by Berger because of the following line. A takes b5. This thing. So if we take, I haven't got it in there, and take back, then we will eventually get to those positions I looked at first. We've now got this 4 versus 3 with a pretty bad formation for white. He'll eventually be able to push this pawn, and then they'll be changed off. His king will be there, black's king will be there, and then you'll see the progression. It'll be there, and then it'll be a big draw. Right, okay, so that's not going to get us anywhere. So this is the move which maybe Berger thought was just winning because the counterattack, king d4, still loses. Playing b4, b4, push our pawn, black's going to have to go back, we take, he takes, and the difference is that we get in. So this is winning because the black king is not in a good position. Back, looking at that line, and maybe Berger looked at king c6, when king b4 simply wins, because now the b pawn drops. But you'll see with that we are looking at something like corresponding squares suddenly. What we want to get into this final position. When white moves to b4, black has to be able to move to c6. So let's just mark them up. So what should black do in this position? He should play king to d6. And white can't do anything. The problem is that these squares are covered, and he's not going to make any progress unless, let's try and move around this way. That might be one way of thinking about it. 3. Obviously, we have to block him. Cannot let him get this square, so we go to there. 3. Yeah, good, nice. There's corresponding squares. What can white do now? 3, no use. Go back one more row, no use. A6. I think A6 is probably the most likely scenario in this situation. So let's see what happens when A6 is played. Now we drop back. We actually end up with a very complicated position. Let's say king b4. The pawn, must take the pawn, otherwise we're going to lose. And then now, I see f4. He takes f4, e5. Minus f takes e5, doesn't really matter. Push the pawn, push the pawn, push the pawn, push the pawn. So the breakthrough does work. And this holds. Shows you this is quite a bit more complicated than I thought. But anyway, so the idea is you b5, push the pawn. Looks very dangerous. Drop back to d6. That's the line. And so when we come up, that moves across. I've lost my corresponding squares. They're here somewhere. The corresponding squares which we've mapped out. 3. So we've got those corresponding squares. Black can hold white out. The breakthrough threat on the king side always gives white a draw in most cases, and the pawn on a5 kind of matches off the pawn on b5, so you end up with musical chairs. What's another line? White could try king to d3, then it's b4, a6, king b6, king to b4, king takes, and now back to this position where black can cope breakthrough king side. Okay, so I thought that was a pretty interesting position. It's got a lot of elements of corresponding squares, like built up like Lego in terms of simple position, add a pawn, add a pawn, add a pawn, add a pawn. And so this final position, which let's say I don't have the 1920 and the 1930 version of Berger's book accessible. Maybe he corrected it. Maybe this is just one of those. I mean, it's been very mean to these people, right? Computers have found so many errors in books and endgame studies and all that sort of stuff. And there's a very interesting sort of little subtle difference to this very interesting study by Johann Berger, who I wasn't familiar with. You can see he's a much more famous author and great composer. His book's obviously good. I've quite enjoyed flicking through it. I found a lot more examples in it. So look, that's it. Hope you enjoyed that, and thank you very much for watching.